American journalist Wolf Blitzer is the son of Holocaust survivors. We met him to talk about his experience producing a documentary about the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and his concerns about the rise of anti-Semitism and fascism in the US and around the globe. Wolf, you're one of the best-known journalists in the United States. I think you can probably do anything you want. Why did you decide to make a documentary about the Washington Holocaust Museum right now?
At a time when there's so much increased anti-Semitism going on, not only in the United States, but indeed around the world, and at a time when there's increased Holocaust denial that seems to be escalating, people making up stories that the 6 million Jews, they never really died, that's fictitious or whatever. I just thought it was important, and CNN thought it was important, that we'd take a tour of this museum, which, as you know, is a very special museum dedicated to the memory of all those who were killed during the Holocaust. So it just felt like a good time to do it.
All 4 of your grandparents got killed by Germans. Both of your parents are Holocaust survivors. You have a document of your father telling his story in your documentary.
Yes. My dad did 2 oral histories telling what happened to him and his family in the build-up to and during World War II. The first one he did was just audio at the US Holocaust Museum, and that was very powerful. For me, even though growing up as a kid, my older sister and I, we always knew our parents were Holocaust survivors. They always spoke about it, but they never really went into the kind of detail that my dad did during this oral history. And then in later years, when my mom and dad had retired and moved to Florida, my dad did a second oral history at the US Holocaust Documentation and Education Center in South Florida and Hollywood, Florida. And that one was video and audio. And I never even knew he did that. But in the course of our producers and researchers doing work researching the build-up to this documentary that he did on a tour of the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, they came upon this.
David Blitzer, B-L-I-T-Z-E-R.
That's my dad, David Blitzer. He survived the Holocaust, met my mother, another survivor, and they got married and came to America after World War II. He recorded his very personal, very powerful survival story for future generations.
I am originally from Oświęcim, which is actually the name of the city of Auschwitz before the war. My wife did not believe that she's going to be able to have children after this concentration camp, but 10 months after we were married, she was.
That was the first time.
That was the first time. It was the first time.
How was that when you?
It was the first time I learned that he did it. An oral history, a question and answer session, a personal testimony of his experience. I learned that he did it, and it was the first time I saw his face as he was talking about it. The one at the Holocaust Museum was, as I said, just audio. This one was video, and you could see the emotion on his face. For me, it was so, and the rest of my family, and the US Holocaust Documentation and Education Center in Florida gave me permission to have it, the 45-minute interview. And so I shared it with my family and some friends, and it was very powerful for all of us to hear my dad talk about his younger sisters who were murdered, his brothers, and his mom and dad, my grandparents, who were killed at Auschwitz. It was only a few years ago when I was in Israel covering the war in Gaza for CNN, that CNN asked some of the anchors to do a piece about their heritage, their history, their personal roots. And I, of course, said yes. And I went to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum, and it was there that I learned, because my dad did a testimony there as well, it was there that I learned that his parents, my grandparents, were killed at Auschwitz. And my dad was from the town, in German it's called Auschwitz. I learned in the course of going there that almost every town and village in Poland before the war had 3 names, had a Polish name, had a German name, and a Yiddish name.
Your father also says in your documentary that the biggest revenge against Hitler was you seeing on television, being a news reporter.
You know, when my dad would see me, and my mom too, when they would see me reporting for CNN on television, worldwide television, my dad said this to me too, this was revenge to Hitler, that a Jewish guy, a son of Holocaust survivors, could be appearing on worldwide television. Because, you know, before the war, he said that could never have happened. And for him, this was just a very emotional experience. Every time they saw me on television, my dad said, this is revenge to Hitler.
Wolf, in Tennessee, a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about the Holocaust was banned. A school district in Texas considered banning an adaptation of Anne Frank's diary. Should we be concerned about these incidents?
Yes. I think it's important for especially younger people who are old enough to understand and know history, to learn of the Holocaust. It's history. In Germany, they teach about the Holocaust. We should teach it here in the United States as well. We want to make sure, and I was a history major in college, that if we don't learn from history, including the bad things in history, we might repeat those horrible things. So it's important that we learn about it, and I'm very upset that some school districts are saying, you know, we're not going to teach about Anne Frank or teach about the Holocaust. It's very important for the next generation to know about it, to learn from it, and make sure we avoid it in the future.
Could you talk a little bit about the danger you see in if it's not taught in schools here?
Well, the danger could be, God forbid, that there could be really a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism, and that you know, the Jews are going to be blamed for whatever problems there are, as was the case in the buildup to World War II and the Holocaust. And so I think it's important that everybody appreciate what happened during the Holocaust, learn the lessons of the Holocaust, and make sure that we never do that again.
Academics and others are really noticed that white supremacy ideology, along with anti-Semitism, as you just said, has moved really from the fringe towards mainstream politics here in the United States.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I don't think that there's some white supremacy going on. I was recently in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, and we're doing a piece for CNN on the aftermath of the Top Supermarket massacre. In doing the research, this young man who traveled from Binghamton, New York to Buffalo, 300 miles, in his social media leading up, even before he did this mass murder, this massacre, he was talking about how proud he was that he was a racist, because he wanted to kill black people. He was a white supremacist, and he was an anti-Semite. It just hit me that, you know, these horrible, horrible traits, especially on social media, there's a lot of copycats, that people are spreading all these crazy, horrible, dangerous ideas. It just hit me. It was very sad to see what's going on.
And what do you do with this sadness?
You try to fight it. You try to do something positive and resist it, and work, learn about it, and react, and tell these people, you know, you can't just go into a supermarket that has a lot of black people inside and kill. It was heartbreaking for me to walk through that supermarket, and in the front of the supermarket, in front of the parking lot, there's a tribute to all those people who were killed. And there's so many of them were elderly women, grandmothers, who went to the supermarket simply to buy some food for their families and their children and grandchildren. And this guy walks in and starts shooting these people simply because they're black. And it's just, you know, an awful situation, horrible.
Wolf, during the documentary, I had the feeling you paused when we saw these piles of shoes. What really kind of moves you or moved you most when you walked through the museum?
Well, that was one of the moments that really moved me, because having lost all four of my grandparents during the Holocaust, my mom's parents and my dad's parents, all four of them were killed during the Holocaust. My dad's parents at Auschwitz, and my mother's parents at a slave labor concentration camp, Skarżycku in Poland. And I went to Auschwitz, and I went to Skarżycku, and, you know, I walked around, I tried to appreciate what was going on. But over these many, many years, I always wanted to touch and feel some remnants of my grandparents. I'm now a grandparent, and I have a grandson, and I know what it's like to be a grandparent. But I grew up without any grandparents, and I really don't have anything that they left behind. When I saw these shoes, I said, I wonder if maybe a pair of shoes are from my grandmother or my grandfather. I would have liked to have had some token, some representative of my grandparents, which I don't have.
And here we are, 77 years later, a child of Holocaust survivors and a German journalist.
After World War II, when my mom and dad were liberated from the concentration camps, they did what all the Jewish survivors did. They immediately started traveling to see who lived and who died, who survived. There was no, you couldn't go online or anything like that. And they would travel, and they would try to find out if their brothers, their sisters, their parents, their grandparents, uncles, aunts, who was alive. And that's where my mom and dad met, because they were roaming around, and they met in Poland, but they wound up in Germany. They thought there were some opportunities in Germany, and they wound up in Augsburg, Germany.
That's where you were born?
That's where I was born. And my older sister was born in Augsburg too. And my dad often told the story to me and to others that one day he was in nearby Munich, which is not far from Augsburg, and he sees a long, long line. He said, in those days after the war, you see a long line, you go wait in line. There must be something good at the end of the line if all these people are waiting in line. So he went and waited at the end of the line. And after about a half an hour, he said to the woman in front of him, Fräulein, by the way, why are we waiting in line? And she looked at him and she said, I thought you knew. And he said, no. He said, we're waiting in line for visas. My dad said, visas for what? She said, America. What my dad didn't know was that the US House of Representatives and the US Senate had just passed what was called the Displaced Persons Act of 1948, which granted 400,000 visas to displaced persons, including Holocaust survivors, refugees. My parents were always so grateful to this country for giving them an opportunity to start a new life and raise a family, become successful, and they became very patriotic Americans in the process.
Well, thank you so very much, and also for this documentary. Absolutely worth watching, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to all you're doing.